John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast. Today we are reading issue number 136, and just a little catch up on what's been going on. In the last couple issues, we got this new story arc by Warren Ellis, and in that, a woman named Isabelle has been murdered, and it turns out that she was an old girlfriend of John Constantine. And apparently she was murdered very brutally because it got in the papers and whatnot, and that's how John found out about it. So he is on a mission to figure out who killed Isabelle. And he's already figured out who it is. The man's name is Joshua Wright, who is some sort of magician, much like Aleister Crowley, John said in the last issue. Except I think he's actually done some magic that even Crowley wouldn't do. So since John is going around and asking people about Joshua Wright and where he can find him, obviously this gets the attention of Joshua Wright, who is not a fan of John looking for him. So he sends two goons to go find John and beat the crap out of him as a warning. And that is pretty much where we left off, with John getting the crap beat out of him and being left on the street. So first things first, with issue 136, we got the cover. We see a very beaten and battered John Constantine on the ground, leaning against a wall. And that's pretty much it. It's a pretty straightforward cover. We also see that this is written by Warren Ellis with art by John Higgins. And as we turn to the first page, we see that this issue is called Haunted Part 3. And we start off exactly where we left off, with John being beaten and bloody on a street sidewalk. And he is very injured because we have something that hasn't really happened too much in the comic, but that is silent panels. We get a couple pages of John just trying to move, and then once he can move his fingers and stuff, he turns over onto his stomach, and we see some blood coming out of his mouth. Then we see him get on his hands and knees, and he vomits, and then he takes a second to compose himself. And then he stands up, and then he feels around on his face to see how bad it is. And when he realizes it looks pretty bad, he begins to kind of wobbly walk away. And as he walks, he's so out of it that he actually falls down again, except this time a police car drives by, and they see him fall, and they see what his face looks like, and they don't stop or do anything. And as they drive by, John looks at him and he says, "Well, that shouldn't have been a fucking surprise." Then he is able to stand up again, and he finds a phone booth. And when he opens the door, he finds a dead cat in there. It looks like the cat's head has been smashed. So he kind of moves it to the side, and then John pulls out some change, and he makes a phone call. And as someone picks up on the phone, John says, "Chaz." And Chaz replies, "John? What's occurring, my son? Here, I heard a blinder today. What's got legs and bleeds a lot?" And then he waits, and then when John doesn't answer, he says, "Half a dog." But John doesn't laugh or anything, of course, and he just says, "Pick me up, Chaz. The phone box round the corner from my gaff." And Chaz says, "You sound fucking awful." And John replies, "On the hurry up, Chaz, please." And then he doesn't even hang up. He just slumps to the ground and drops the phone. And so he's sitting in this phone box, and then he looks at the dead cat who's got flies all over it, and he says, "I know how you feel, mate." Then we turn the page, and we see Chaz has just arrived at the phone booth, and he's looking down at John, and he says, "Fuck's sake, I knew something was up when you said please." And to that, John says, "Cheeky bastard." And Chaz jokes, "What are you going to do about it? Cough on me?" But John just replies, "Get me out of here. I got a couple of boxes of me stuff in me gaff. Load it in your cab. Chuck me in there too, and get me out of here." And Chaz kind of realizes John is not in a joking mood, and so he gets all serious and he says, "All right, John." And then he helps him up and puts him in the back of his cab. And then just like John said, he goes over to John's house, and then he begins to load some boxes into his cab. And as he loads the last one, he says, "Last one. Where to, John?" And John replies, "Look down the street. Left. Tell me what you see." So Chaz stands up and looks out, and he sees two men in shadow just watching them. And with a clenched fist, he asks, Are they the pricks who filled you in? Hold on. I got me crowbar in the boot. But John stops him by saying, Leave it, Chaz. Just drive, mate. So Chaz does just that. He begins to drive away, and he drives past them, and they see John in the back seat, and they also see Chaz's cab number. I'm not sure if that matters. But then we cut to them driving, and it seems like maybe John is recovering a little bit because his dialogue is not shaky as he says, Hotel Holt, Chaz. And Chaz says, Bit fucking swanky, John. And John replies, Center of town, well away from here. So Chaz drives them to this fancy hotel, and as John stands in front of the check-in desk, the concierge does not look very happy because obviously John is all bloody and beaten, and this is not his normal clientele. So he says, Sir, I really think you should consider either the bed and breakfasts on Tottenham Court Road or Casualty. And then he notices that Chaz is bringing all of John's boxes in, and he looks at Chaz and says, Excuse me, what are you doing with those boxes? And Chaz looks at him bewildered and says, Sir's luggage. So Chaz is treating this like John is just a fare of his and not someone he actually knows. Then we see John reach into his jacket and he pulls out a stack of money and he slams it down on the counter and he says, I want the top floor front suite that overlooks the square, and I want to see the hotel doctor. Be a good lad and don't fuck me about. You wouldn't want anyone to know what you pay the Filipino cleaning lady to do when no one's looking. And then he blows his bloody nose into his hand, and then he throws the bloody mucus onto the counter along with the money, and he says, You don't need to write my name down anywhere. And the concierge looks very surprised by this, but it seems to have worked because as we turn the page, we see John is in a hotel room. So he's laying shirtless on the king-size bed, and he's covering his eyes from the light. I'm assuming he's got a headache. And he's asking Chaz, Has he gone? And Chaz closes the door and shuts the light off. And he says, I had to slip him another £100 to keep him stum. That all right? And John answers, Yeah, whatever. And then Chaz says, I think it's time you told me what the score is here, John. And then we see John roll over and reach into his jacket pockets and pull out some cigarettes. And he says, Fuck, I feel awful. And then Chaz sits on the bed and he says, You've had 7 shades of shit kicked out of you. Come on, tell us why. And as John turns back over to lay on his back on the bed, he says, Ex-girlfriend of mine got killed the other day. I had the idea that someone in my game did it. Turned out, I was right. And then he pulls out a cigarette and lights it and continues saying, It weren't more than instinct, to be honest. She could have been killed by a customer or relative, or a jealous ex, or a neighbor who lost his shit one night and felt like going paddling in a woman's guts. But it had the smell on it, Chaz. I poked around in it, dropped the bloke's name in all the wrong places. And hey, presto, I got a good hard kicking and a warning to leave the bastard alone. Here's the thing. The geezer in question fancies himself as a bit of an Aleister Crowley. All you need to know about Crowley, Chaz, is that he was a devious twat, a clever bastard. He liked young rich men's bums. And then John moves to the edge of the bed and he sits up and he grabs his side as he says, And he has this idea about something called a Scarlet Woman. Crowley called her Babylon, the great whore, vessel for sex magic, someone he could venerate and degrade and love and fuck up and use. He played his little mind games on Isabelle and turned her into his Scarlet Woman and sank her in shit. And when she was all used up, he killed her. That's the bit Crowley never did. That's his clever little fucking innovation, see? He killed her, and no one gives a fuck because she was some doomed little tart in a Brixton bedsit. And the score, Chaz, is that he thinks I've taken my beating and run off to be a good little boy somewhere quiet. And then he takes a drag of his cigarette, and he says, You better go, mate. Your missus will be doing her pieces. There's a couple of hundred in your glove compartment. Then we turn the page and we cut to 4 a.m. and we see John standing and he's drinking something as he looks out the window of his hotel room. And as he looks out, his narration says, Sometimes I can't face London. Seeing the things it does to people, feeling whatever it's doing to me. I can't look London in the eye sometimes. All I can do is hunch over under London's pressure, staggering around like some fucking troglodyte with London night on my shoulders. looking for some kind of anesthetic. Then we see out of John's window at what he's looking at, and he's watching a man in the park get confronted by another man, and his narration continues saying, "Sometimes it's only in the dark that I get my spine back. London can't see me here, down in the night in the back alleys. I'm batting through its veins and arteries, drinking its blood. Here, no one knows that my cock's shriveled up into my guts, that I'm still an inch or two from shitting my pants due to the kicking I took. Here, I'm John Constantine and loving it. Bastard terrifying with my eyes full of history and my head full of secret things. Here in one of London's collapsed veins, feeding off it." And as John is saying this, we see the man he's watching in the park getting approached by another man who has a knife. And as, I guess, a struggle ensues, the man with the knife swings it and catches the man, I guess he's robbing's eye. And I think John is saying that he's literally feeding off this, like he's getting some kind of power from watching this from above. And I think this because his next narration says, "I'm all over London, drinking it down." Then we cut to multiple different scenes throughout London where he's feeling what's happening here as well. We see the leg of a woman and blood is coming down it. And we don't really know what's going on, but blood is also dripping on the concrete from between her legs. We see another woman who's injecting heroin into her arm, and she looks like she's in an abandoned house. And then we see some homeless people who are just out in the rain, and they're trying to shield themselves from it. And over these panels, John's narration says, "Down by Victoria, a young, poor, cheap, hopeless, heart-dead whore is asking 20 notes for French and sex, wondering if this punter will be the one who pulls her into the car, or gives her a baby, or gives her AIDS, or shoves a knife up her and twists so her guts fall down her legs." And that was over the first scene where we just see the woman's legs and blood coming down them. So I'm assuming it's the latter of all those options. Then we get the panel of the woman in the abandoned house and doing drugs, and the narration continues saying, "On the blood-streaked steps of an underground toilet in Islington, a young copper rolls his first murder victim and finds out that people shit themselves when they die. And in Clarewell, a 10-year-old boy, sent out by his fucked up meth's breath mom, finds his dad turned blue on the street with a needle still in his arm." Then next to the third panel of homeless men, the narration says, "And all over London, the sirens start and the cries go out, and the tears don't dry, and everyone looks up to find that the sky's so stained by streetlight that you can't see the stars anymore." Then we cut back to John in his apartment, and his narration finishes saying, "London breathes in and out." And we see the alarm clock again, and it still says 4 a.m. Then we get a panel of a kind of seedy-looking housing complex. And we don't see John directly, but we do see someone smoking, and that person is staring at the buzzers for each of the units. And we see one of the names on those buzzers is Hawkstorm, which is the name of one of the guys that John talked to in the last issue. I believe John calls him Sparrowfart, kind of to be funny, because the dude's last name is actually Hawkstorm. And as we turn the page, we see that Sparrowfart is indeed sitting in his house watching TV, and he's watching some sort of cooking program. And the woman on it is saying, "To make proper toast, the grill must be very, very hot. You want it to be crispy on the outside and all squidgy on the inside, after all. So preheat it for 10 full minutes before even cutting your bread, and then get it under that heat." And as the TV's doing this, we're seeing that Sparrowfart has his hand down his pants. And I'm not sure if he's actually like touching himself because he's turned on, or if that's just how he sits in this chair. But as that's happening, all of a sudden the TV cuts out and goes to a hiss. And then Sparrowfart leans forward to adjust the dial, and he says, "Just my bleeding luck. I was just getting into that." So it seems maybe he was about to masturbate to that. But as he leans forward, we see there is a lamp next to him, and it doesn't have a shade or anything, and the light bulb explodes right next to his face. And he screams in pain as little bits of glass get embedded into his face. And then all of a sudden, the lights go out in his flat, and he hears a voice say, "Sparrowfart, me old China. How are you doing?" But John's not in the room. It's just a voice in the air. And Sparrowfart looks up and says, "Constantine?" And John's voice says, "Bit late for you to be up playing with yourself over TV, Cook Sparrowfart. Waiting up for me, were you?" And Sparrowfart just looks around nervously, and John continues saying, "You stitched me up, you bag of shit. You talked to Wright. I knew you knew him. And Wright had a pair of bastards work me over. They saw me get helped out of the area. Sorted. Job done. But the stupid twats never followed me, did they? Now none of you know where I am." And as John says this last line, it seems that Sparrowfart is getting more and more nervous, so he begins crawling on the ground towards the wall across the room with the light switch. And John continues saying, "But I know where you are, and I know where Wright is. I went to see Map. You can't find me, but I can find you anytime I like." And as John says that last line, Sparrowfart reaches up and flicks on the light switch, and he turns around quickly to try to catch John, but he is very surprised to find no one in the room with him. Then we cut back to John's hotel room, and now his alarm clock says 4:10. Then we see John take a big gulp of alcohol from his glass, and then he just looks at us and smiles. And that, my friend, is the end of the issue. So if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, at gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.